If people can't believe you about things that can be observed and can
measured
be tested,
and literally,
like if you're going to say something crazy about something that we can establish, whether it's about the climate or whether it's about an election or anything like that, they're not going to believe you about things that are unseen that you have to take on faith because you've shot your credibility. Welcome back to Jesus versus America. Jesus told us that we couldn't serve two masters, but so many of us are trying to serve the American culture while trying to follow Jesus. I'm John, and I'm joined by my good friends Monique and Wisdom, and today we're joined also by Dr. Stephen Fitch, who's the founder and CEO of Accelerated Restoration Collaborative. You'll hear about that and some of the work of his life in just a moment. The episode we're doing today is, do Christians care about climate change, or why are they so afraid to talk about climate change? And this repeatedly is one of the issues that they care about most, especially young adults to whom this podcast is focused. So I'm going to turn first to Wisdom and just ask, among Gen Z that you kind of represent, tell me their perspective on this question, because in all the years I've worked with young adults, it seems like increasingly this is a concern for people who are wondering what their future is going to look like.
Yeah.
How do they see this issue?
Well, Gen Z is the most diverse and digitally connected generation that we've ever seen. And they are living in a world where they are more acutely aware of pollution, of the state of the environment, of corruption that businesses have onto the earth, onto the planet. And so I feel like because of the digital awareness and social media and whatnot, the connection or the access we have to see what's going on out in the world and the state of the planet, they are more acutely aware of it. And because of that informs them of wanting to do something about it. I mean, you have people like, I think of Greta Thunberg, this young woman who is a activist from, I believe, Sweden or something, and at a young age she uses her voice to spark up a change in this area, and it inspires Gen Z to do the same. They are all about wanting to do something about the state of the world.
Yeah.
And so they turn to the church and think, well, this is the place where I can do that kind of thing, right?
No, they turn to the church and think, you haven't done anything about it. You don't give a hoot about this. You don't talk about it. I don't see any initiatives on the church's end to do it. So they're saying, well, they have
not even about stewardship.
Yeah. There's no history, at least in their eyes, that the church has participated in this act. So
and sometimes even kind of repressed it.
Yes.
Avoided conversation. So I want to bring Steve into this conversation. Let me just give a little bit of background that happened to me actually this week. One of my clients works in electric vehicle charging, and they were bragging on one of the company about the impact it's making. And they said, if you look at the 3 years and all the vehicle miles that have been driven on electric vehicles charging from our charger networks, they said how many, millions or billions of miles. And they said that would be the equivalent, so you guys can get a picture of planting 25 million trees. That's what they're over a 3-year period. And everybody was applauding and thinking that's an amazing thing over 3 years to have planted but they didn't actually plant them. They were just saying that was the equivalent of planting that many trees. One of the reasons I really wanted to talk to Steve about this.
And that equivalence is not sustainable.
I mean, but the reason I wanted to bring Steve into the conversation is because he has a lot of credibility in this area. I mean, we could say his background. I mean, he has a bachelor's in business from Azusa Pacific University. He did his master's in divinity at Fuller Theological Seminary. He went back and did a DMin at Azusa Pacific University. But I think the thing that gives him the most credibility in this topic is the organizations he's led through a lot of partner organizations and local people have planted over 1 billion trees around the world. And that, I think, is the first time that's ever been done by any nonprofit to get to a level like that. And here's
not the equivalency.
Yeah, not the equivalent
actual
of them.
Planted
actual trees that were planted over the period of time that you've been working in this area. So Steve, welcome to Jesus versus America, and we're glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved in this, because I mentioned all of your background is either in Christian, education, ministry, seminary. You were a pastor for a while as well. So that seems to be one of those things that everyone expects. So you did nothing in the area of anything related to climate, poverty relief, because that's what Christians do, nothing, just like what Wisdom said. And you're at the other end of that. So I'm really keen for people to meet you and also know what it is that you've been doing. So tell us a little bit about that.
I'm excited to be with you. Just a clarification, I got a DMin, which means Doctor of Ministry, and I didn't get a demon.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, not a demon, a D.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Take
right.
a breath.
Yeah. And there is some fundamentalist church that actually has made that connection for us. I'm sure they're out there because you had any education. That was already a problem. Yeah.
Well, just for what it's worth, how did I get into that? I spent a good portion of my years growing up in the Philippines, like Wisdom is Filipina. And when I was a kid, the Philippines was covered with jungle. And the reef systems were so pristine and gorgeous. And I grew up in a tropical paradise.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't want to be a business major. I wanted to be a biology major, but I learned fairly quick that I was never going to get past organic chemistry.
Yeah. So, as did we all.
Same.
Bottom line is new direction, and then ended up in ministry, inner city youth ministry, planting the church in Rancho Cucamonga. Then I became the overseer of about 60 churches here in California, and that's when I found out a month in that I had been put in charge, unbeknownst to me, of Ethiopia, to open a ministry in Ethiopia. That was a blast. And as a missionary kid, I wanted nothing to do with overseas ministries, frankly. Don't tell God what you're not going to do.
Yeah.
Bottom line is I fell in love with Ethiopia. We did some amazing humanitarian works, building hospitals and schools and orphanages. But I got to know President Haile Mariam of the Southern Peoples Region. And one day, out of the blue, he asked me if I would consider taking over a failed forest restoration project. Well, that's great. Failed forest restoration project. It was fully funded by the EU, and it was expertly led by all the right degree holders. I told him, I'll pray about it, but I said, let me go talk to the people. And I think that's where my third culture kid stuff kicked in, because I went to this remote village, Udawatete, and sat down with these people and learned why the project failed. And came back to the U.S. I was done with my seat time and ready to go into writing my dissertation. And that became the philosophy behind something that's a bit ironic. It's not first and foremost about planting trees. It's about caring for the impoverished people that are there in those village settings.
And you learned that in listening to the people and trying to figure out. So when you say I learned why it had failed, that sounds like it set up that kind of cornerstone to the approach that you take in the work that you do. Like, why had it failed, and what did you do differently that was going to, result in all of this reforestation, but at the same time, and all the jobs that come with it, and all of the lives that are lifted up as you do that? Like, what was the shift in your thinking?
The big paradigm shift was rather profound. The failed project went into the village and required them to build the nursery, work in the nursery, seedling nursery, plant the trees, etc. But they didn't pay them. They didn't pay them a burr or a penny. They didn't pay them at all. And so, it kind of sounds like slave labor to me, but that is a very common approach. Is you've got to work. You messed it up. Now you've got to fix this. And over again, forest restoration groups, they marginalize the local population. They'll move them out. They'll require them to work. And the model that we came up with, we called it employ to plant. That was the idea in the dissertation. So we came in and offered fair wage, long-term employment, and their job was to produce the trees in the nursery, the seedlings in the nursery, to plant them, and then to protect them. And what we found is they fell in love with their forest.
Yeah.
And we took away the desperation mode, because they were, in fact, originally inadvertently responsible for cutting down the trees, because during the Derg period of the communist period of Ethiopia's history, poverty became rampant at a whole new level, and the only way they could survive was by cutting down these trees and turning them into charcoal and make $1 or $2 a week.
So you were leading a bunch of churches. You were working on a dissertation. You came up with this model after seeing Ethiopia. So at that point, you left ministry, right? Is that what happened? You just left ministry to do this?
No, I didn't leave ministry.
Because that's the interesting part, is this very much sounds like ministry. And that's what I want to focus on, because it seems like here's a way that we continue to serve the Lord and do what the Lord commands in his service, moving away. But I can tell you that a lot of people would say, oh, you're a pastor, you're doing this, you're overseeing churches, and then you left to do that. And I think very much in your testimonies that we've talked, like, no, that was the continuation of what the Lord was having me do, right?
Absolutely. I absolutely did not leave ministry, and I'm still radically committed to the kingdom of God and seeing ministry accomplished in a different way, if you will, because caring for the poor, anybody around the table disagree with, biblically, is that important?
Yeah.
Not around this table. You'll get a lot of agreement here. But there might be disagreements elsewhere. Yeah.
I mean, you can't read the Bible and come away with the caring for the poor doesn't matter. And then caring for the planet. Now there's the debate. The Bible is emphatic. In fact, you can make a strong case that our original vocation, Genesis 2:15, that Adam was called to be the steward. And I think you referenced that earlier, to be the steward of the garden. That's our original vocation. And my challenge was, and my doctoral committee told me they think I coined a term, because you have born again. The challenge is so many Christians are born against. Yeah, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? What do you do when you've got a group of people, for various reasons, not wanting to do what, in my opinion, and I think any honest study of Scripture would show, we're here to care for this planet.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking too much. You guys, throw out your thoughts.
I have so many thoughts.
Jump in.
Even going back further, just to kind of point out something you said sort of at the beginning of that, which I think is a very interesting distinction we kind of like breeze past, is what the model was before and then what the model became, like bringing dignity and like employing people and giving worth to their work. I mean, I just want to take a moment to like pause there and talk about it, because I think a lot of people that do care about climate change maybe don't even know that organizations are doing this. So that's a very important distinction of how we're going about climate change, and maybe what certain NGOs are doing versus how you're doing it is radically different and important. And so that's like a really important distinction to make. I think another distinction to make is a lot of programs, especially Christian programs, when it comes to fighting poverty, helping the impoverished, or whether it's, it's trying to save the planet, climate, whatever, stewardship, it comes with strings attached, where it's like, first accept Jesus, or be part of like a church service every Sunday, or we won't feed you, or like there's these weird strings attached that I think make people, particularly outside of the church, uncomfortable and skeptical of us stepping into that space, because the way they see it is like, you don't actually care about the thing. This is the excuse for you to push your agenda and your views and get people to accept Christ in order to receive help. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit before I go into my third thought that I've had.
One of the oddities of my life is I've always thought differently. There's just something about me that doesn't work.
Yeah. And
growing up as a missionary kid, watching what doesn't work.
Right.
And what you just described, they've got to change before we'll accept them.
Right.
So my approach to ministry started, first of all, inner city youth pastor for 5.5 years.
Yeah.
Had all of these gang kids and all these broken home kids.
Yeah.
First thing we did is we accepted them.
Right.
Just love them.
Yeah.
We didn't require them to change their behavior.
Yeah.
We accepted them. And then they started to believe, and then they changed their behavior.
Right. Because they saw, they got to learn who Jesus was
Yes.
through the relationship and the way they were treated. And I think that is a big reason why people reject, especially outside of the church, or people that are frustrated with the church, why they reject us getting involved. Forget about saying we don't even care. Like, because as a whole, I feel like we can say the church doesn't care about climate change as much as like outside of the church, right? Forget about that part. When we do step in, we're not trusted, and that is why it seems very suspicious, because there's nowhere in the Bible that says care for the poor, but only if they believe in me, or you know what I mean, or care for the widow only if she believes in me.
Or we come in with, we'll do it for you. Yeah, we
the
do it
top down instead of going from the
Because-
bottom up and saying, what do you need as a community, and let us help fill
Right.
those needs.
Right. So to get to sustainable development, like including the people that you're actually trying to help, not only just in hearing them out, but actually in every aspect
Yes.
of it until they own it completely. In fact, some people start with they have to own it from the beginning.
Yes.
I was looking into, like, not only is 1 billion trees an impressive number, but I think over those years, correct me if this is the wrong number, but I thought it was something like 12,000 different jobs and people were employed in different ways to be doing that.
It's just such a radical model. It's just
there
so
are so many. I don't know if that's the
amazing.
right, but
We had over 12,000
Yeah.
global employees.
that is just, I mean, that's just like, so now somebody doesn't have to deforest, they can actually be employed to reforest,
Right.
but that's a lot of people whose lives are impacted.
That's like the most beautiful form of, like, you want to see change being sustainable, like that is it. Like that's literally hitting it from every point, which I think is amazing.
Well, there are different causes behind radical deforestation globally. I mean, in the Philippines, for instance, one of the major reasons was commercial logging for valuable hardwoods. But in so many places across the globe, in Africa kind of being the epicenter, what you have is cultures and economies, local homes, that their heating and their cooking is from charcoal. And so you have to cut down a live tree to produce charcoal.
Right.
And so imagine this. You've got millions and millions of almost always women in Africa going out and cutting down 2, 3, 4 live trees every single week and turning it into charcoal. And why are they doing it? Because they want to feed their kids.
Right.
And
For heating, for cooking, to meet
Survival.
needs that are
and they want to sell it.
right. Yeah.
They make a couple of bucks off this one tree
tree,
that they
yeah.
cut down, they turn into
Yeah.
charcoal. And I've always said it this way: if my kids were starving, I'm cutting down a tree.
Yeah.
And what the model, the employ to plant, and I would now call it employ to restore, did was it provided the dignity of employment, which
Yeah.
Monique, you referenced that,
Yeah.
the dignity of employment.
Yeah.
We see you.
Yeah.
We care
and
for you.
value your work and value
Right.
what you're bringing to
And
this.
we're not going to give you a freebie. You know, it's not just a handout stuff, and then you're on your own. You have a job,
Yeah.
and the job has to be productive and show results.
Right. Yeah. So I think that was like my first two thoughts was, either we're not caring about it, or people aren't trusting it because the church tends to put those strings attached. And if the strings aren't attached, I feel like especially super fundamentalist Christian groups don't want anything to do with it. Like if it's not the prayer pamphlet first before accept Christ to get this job, they're like, oh, well then no, right? So there's that. And I think the third component of why, like if we're bringing up the question, why do Christians not even like don't want to get involved, but like literally cower from this topic? Like couldn't run farther from it faster, in my opinion, has to do with politics.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are a large group of people that think if you're a Christian, you have to be associated with a very specific political party, namely the Republican Party. And I think they view the Democratic Party almost as an enemy to like the values of God or whatever. And because the Democratic Party tends to, not all, but obviously tends to care about this more, then it's like, oh, that's a liberal agenda that we don't want to hitch ourselves to. Because if we agree that there's value in that, then we're attributing value to the enemy or value to the side.
Yeah. I think we all agree. Like, I don't think we're gonna have to convince anybody around this table that the Bible does command us to steward the planet, to take care of it. I like the way you said it was our original vocation. I do think that that's a thing that was given to us to steward, for each other and for the animals and even for the plants. And they all relate to one another the way we're doing it.
There's such a responsibility. There are laws. Like, look at the old law on how you treat animals, how they're to be killed if you're going to eat them. I mean, it was very important.
What would you say to the Christian that would have the argument? I've heard this before, and I don't agree with it, but I know that people can be there. Well, it's a broken world and we need redemption anyways, and we're going to heaven. Like, and by the way, mind you, these people don't think of a planet when they think of heaven and the kingdom of God. That's a majority of Christians in the country. They don't think of an actual planet. They think of, floating in the clouds.
I think it's nuts that we do that in no other area. Like, we say the world is broken, but
So
it's
we're not
not
going
getting
to touch
hotter.
it because it's all...
But it's not getting hotter. It's broken in every other way. Sin is rampant, but the climate is fine.
Right.
Like, that's untouched somehow.
Right.
Even though we've got fundamentalist Christians who believe that, like, death didn't even enter the world until sin entered, and then it causes death. But it doesn't cause any kind of climate changes. So the broken world, it like exempts that. That's weird. And second of all, the idea that we're going to be out of here soon, and we're just going to be gone. I mean, just looking over the history of the church, I mean, the Apostle Paul thought that Christ's return might be imminent. Imagine if he said, hey, Paul, can we just go ahead and wreck the planet since Jesus is coming back soon? He would have said no first. But second, even somebody who believes that the earth is, I mean, we've lived 2,000 more years or 1,900 more years, and we might be here as humans far into the future. I think every generation has thought, we're out of here soon. It doesn't matter.
Well, I think it could be a daunting thing of like, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And like, we're going to do these efforts. And then for like, what?
For what? I think there's some value in at least thinking, what could we do? But it almost ignores the fact that we're the ones that kind of got us here.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Right? I mean, I hear all sorts of arguments about, well, there's nothing we can do that's economically viable, or whatever we do, we can't change it. But we actually, if it's true we caused it, there might be some things we could do to change it. It isn't like it just happened and humans can't stop it. But I think that's where it kind of falls apart, is they don't believe those things, right?
And so in all fairness, because I know someone's watching that is thinking this or may comment this, there are these two views of global warming that science to some extent will back up both. And so even in a biology class I took with a very, very liberal professor talking about this topic, yes, the planet is cyclical, right? So when you look back to the ice age, and it heated and it cooled, and the ice age and everything died, and then it started over again. And so there is a natural cycle to this planet that goes from extreme heat to then cold and over again and everything in between. And there is scientific evidence that shows that the planet is going to do this on its own. It did it before us, during us, after, whatever, right? So there is that. I think people cling to that to the extreme, and they're like, humans did not cause this. Like, we literally don't. It's gonna, like when you say it's gonna happen anyway, okay? Then there is all this scientific evidence, and it's really hard to deny when you really look at like the places where we send all our fast fashion and it's piled up this high into the ocean, to say that we are not destroying things. We absolutely are. So both things can be true. Yes, the planet has a natural cycle of heating and cooling and everything else in between, but also we are destroying things, and we're destroying God's creation, and we're making it worse, and we're speeding it up, and we are called to steward this place, and we should want to take care of it because the Lord cares about that.
The reason I don't have any sympathy for that argument sometimes is because the same people who believe the earth is 10,000 years or less are the ones who suddenly become ice age pushers. When
That's such a good
it's so
point.
interesting to me that you're like,
We pick and
you
choose.
are wondering
Right.
if it's 6,000 years old,
Yeah.
maybe you'll go to 10, but somehow
Right.
over millions of years, climate change has been
Right.
happening.
And it's
right?
correct.
Like, it's so
and
bizarre.
I'm not saying that it's a valid thing to hold to on its own. I'm just saying I know somebody is
Yeah.
thinking that and bringing it up. So I just want to qualify that. Yes, of course, the planet undergoes these things naturally, but 100% we have like exasperated that to the nth degree, and we absolutely have a decision on whether we become this crazy Mad Max dystopian society where food is scarce and we've killed the ocean, and we do have a way to stop that and halt that and affect that and make this a better place for the future generations, and we should.
And I think that Christians in the church can so often, we cling to the being agents of goodness in the emotional and the spiritual, and never the physical and the like tangible,
here and now.
the tangible,
Right.
you know. And so that maybe that's why the things like the planet and taking care of it and stewarding the physical planet and the environment just goes out the window, because we'd rather,
when it should be the most tangible thing. When it should be like the most tangible thing. Do you know what I mean? And it's really hard to deny that. And I think if you ask anybody who's a Christian, is the kingdom of God initiated now and also in the after? And they'd be like, of course. And are we called to make physical change now and alleviate poverty and help, like, again, the orphan, the widow, and this and that now?
Right.
Of course we're called to do that now. Okay, so are we also called to try to make this world healthy in terms of like our natural resources and our planet, and like keeping it clean and like caring about life suffering, whether it's now or 50, 100, 200 years from now? Of course, but we can't get
Especially when
there.
they're interrelated. And I think that's your point,
Yes.
Steve, is that you know, like, they are hand in hand. And especially if you're going in first and foremost for poverty alleviation or
Yes.
for development, and you find that this also is one of the best ways to do it. I think that's the point I think that you've been trying to make.
Yeah.
It is, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how to say this diplomatically. You can do the Republicans versus Democrat and virtue, not virtue. I have family members and friends on both sides of
Right.
the equation. You probably do too.
Yeah.
I don't want to be born against either group,
Right.
because Christ called us to love.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's so much about a political party as it's about money.
Interesting.
And here's my experience. I've lived in both worlds for the last 20 years. I'm historically an evangelical Christian, and I've been in the environmental community. And here's part of my critique of the environmental community. I'm sorry, they've had 60 years to get this right. Hello? And you go on any of the big environmental organization websites and find out how many trees are they planting.
Right.
They talk about it.
Or are they employing these people, or what's the
You won't hear them talking about that. And a lot of it is this, I call it vomiting all over your audience, because it's all this bad environmental news about how awful things is. Give us money. I'm sorry, I've been to their sites.
Yeah.
I don't see changes.
Wow.
And that's why I wanted to
and-
point out what you said earlier, because I feel like people don't know what to look for if they do care about it and are unaware of that.
Well, and I'll take it one step further. And here's kind of a risk, because I'm not going to name names, but one of the world's wealthiest individuals and I had a conversation about 3.5 years ago. Loved our work. He and his partner, gushy positive. We had about a 35, 40-minute conversation. They ended up giving $5 million to the organization. And of course, at that time, that planted a lot of trees and employed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I was thrilled. But several months later, they produced a $500 million yacht. And I'm sorry, but
For vacationing or for some other.
well, it's not.
Not that there's probably an excuse,
they
right?
They needed a
But-
bigger boat, and so much of what I've seen is, I don't really care that much about what you say. I want to see what you do.
Yeah.
Because here's what it comes down to from my perspective. The church, both liberal and conservative, have been taught to care for the poor.
Yeah.
They haven't been taught to care for the planet. And that's orthodoxy. And orthodoxy is really, really important. I mean, we have parallel concepts in terms like you go to an orthodontist. You want somebody who's properly trained before you show up at your dentist office because you want your teeth to be straight, which is your orthopraxy. And so if you look at Scripture, if you give it a chance, and it's everywhere. There's actually a version of the translation of the Bible called the Green Bible. And you get that Bible, and you see for the first time in your life how many texts are stressing this is God's creation. I mean, we all agree on that. It's
The
God's
Green
creation.
Bible.
Is it highlighted in green, like all the passages?
Well, I mean, you think about it. I have 9 fruit trees in my backyard that I've grown, and I have raised vegetable beds, etc. You go in my backyard, and you mess up my veggies and my fruit trees, we're going to have words. And let me just read you one verse that I bet you've never noticed before. It's in the last book, right? You know, the book where God comes and wrecks everything? No. Why? Revelation 11:18, the nations were angry and your wrath has come. Okay, that sounds like an angry God. Why? Why? The time has come for judging the dead, rewarding the servants of your prophets, your servants and your prophets, for the people who revere your name, both great and small. And here's the catcher that I bet nobody's ever underlined or you've hardly noticed. And for destroying those who destroy the earth. For destroying those who destroy the earth. How many have noticed that text?
Wow.
And so many other texts. And were you raised in Sunday school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you grew up knowing that what we now call the Middle East was once called what? The Fertile
Crescent.
It was fertile. The hanging gardens of Babylon. The Garden of Eden was there. All of the animals and the beauty that was described in the Old Testament, that's all gone. That's all gone. And what is the Middle East now?
Yeah.
What does it look environmental?
Like this desert.
Desert.
we have this selective memory that Christians shouldn't have because if you've read the Old Testament, you know that there was the lions that David slew, the bears that David slew. They're extinct now. They're locally extinct. The Asiatic lion, Asiatic bear are long gone from there. Right. All of those creatures and all of that, the cedars of Lebanon, all chopped down. And we know that it was the first area of the world that was deforested, overplowed, overgrazed, and soil salinated.
Yeah.
Because once the aquifers go down, usually the last third of an aquifer is saline.
Yeah.
And if you're still pumping or getting water out of that well, you're dumping salt water all over your land. So where am I going with that is we need to really commit to learning the truth of God's word.
Yeah.
And the Bible is pro-planet.
Right.
And one of the biggest issues, you kick this around a bit, we don't belong to a sky religion.
Yeah.
That's a Platonic theology.
Yeah.
And we get our image of, sitting on clouds, little babies sitting on clouds, naked little babies, by the way. Seems kind of weird. Playing
Baby
harps.
cherub.
Right.
And that comes from Dante's Inferno.
Right.
That comes, and it was depicted in cartoons. But the Word of God is very clear that we're called to be stewards.
Yeah.
Romans 8 says creation's crying out,
Yeah.
waiting for
Yeah.
the people of God, in essence, to be revealed.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all one side. It's not two sides.
Yeah.
It's every Christian is called to care about this.
And for what it's worth, the mainline denominations and many, I would say, tend to be Democrat. It's the independents, the Baptists, the evangelicals that tend to be Republican. And I would still say I'm not sure either side is really doing anything of substance.
I was looking into that. Pew did a survey in 2022 asking religious groups what they thought about just the idea that the earth is getting warmer. And the question they asked in this one was, is the earth getting warmer due to human activities? That was the first one. Is it getting warmer? So 53% of all adults, just in general, regardless of religion or no religion, agreed with that. 54% of Catholics agreed with that. 50% of mainline Protestants agree with that. All in the average, right? 32% of evangelical Christians agreed with that, which you mentioned politics earlier, I'm going to come back to, seemed to match 24% of Republicans who agreed that the earth was getting warmer. One of the most interesting things is evangelical Christians had the highest percentage of saying the earth is getting warmer because of natural patterns, which you mentioned. They were the highest among everyone to believe that. They were also the highest to say there is no evidence the earth is getting warmer at all. They were the highest in that area. So again, when we're accused of having magical thinking, that might be why. I mean, if people can't believe you about things that can be observed and can
measured
be tested,
and literally,
like if you're going to say
proven.
something crazy about something that we can establish, whether it's about the climate or whether it's about an election or anything like that, they're not going to believe you about things that are unseen that you have to take on faith because you've shot your credibility. When Pew asked, is global climate change either extremely serious problem or a very serious problem, 57% of all U.S. adults agreed, 57% of Catholics agreed, 46% of mainline Protestants agreed, 34% of evangelicals agreed. And again, 25% of Republicans. It seems like there's that lineup where that's what's pulling people closer to it. And I think that when they asked evangelicals, why don't you believe that these are serious problems? Those who did not think it was a serious problem.
Oh, please tell me.
Well, there's some. So I think a couple of these are probably. One of them is there are bigger problems in the world. And what's interesting is I want to give credit to this one because even among Gen Z and even among people who say they care about the climate, care about the earth, care about the environment, that is always true until you ask them to rank things in order. So if you give them, this goes back to like when you go to some of those environmentalists on their site, like if you go to people. And I remember when I was teaching public policy, it was one of the most interesting things you do. You give people like 30 items and you ask them to rank them in terms of which are the biggest problems in the world. And somehow, even though climate is so important, it ends up like somewhere at the bottom when anybody ranks it. Especially even younger people who are so concerned about it, and you guys are going to leave us with a planet that's burning. But when you ask them to rank, it somehow ranks lower, and it even ranks even lower when you ask people what they would change to see it. So let's just say we're all kind of a little bit of hypocrites on this, right? Like we all want to change
because it's not as imminent feeling.
Right. Yep.
Like you know that the big destruction is coming, and little by little, as we do nothing, it compounds. But because it's literally not right now, it somehow has less importance.
But I'll also point out, since we have Steve with us, that high on the list usually is alleviation of poverty. Which is exactly what is happening here.
So the fact that you've married these two things is amazing.
Right, and that's why I think it is.
Because we can get people to care about that.
Yeah, I mean, just the number of countries you've done this in, too. I mean, you mentioned a couple, but I think there was like 10 or 12 or 15 different countries you were working in. Yeah.
Are we going to link ways to support
this?
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna get behind so that you can know exactly where to go. So
I think can get involved.
I think on the idea that there are much bigger problems, it seems everybody agrees, whether it's true or they just rank this lower. So let's give credit there. But the other reasons that evangelicals didn't think that it was a serious problem is God is in control of the climate. Which I think God would say, actually, to some degree, I've put you in charge of the earth.
Exactly.
To a very large degree.
A large degree,
Okay, the largest degree.
Like yes, I hold the entire cosmos together and all exists, but like I gave you a planet that was operating perfectly fine. It was a paradise, right? It's.
He's like, here's my science. It works. What are you going to do with it?
You said you grew up in the Philippines as a beautiful paradise. You probably should mention you've gone back, and the whole areas that you were there are no longer as pristine.
Even in my lifetime, I've seen changes like that.
Yeah. Well, he put us in control, and apparently we want to give the privilege right back and say, no, you're in control. The next reason is I just don't believe it's happening. So it's just not happening. And by the way, this is just, about any kind of changes. And they're also, evangelicals are the most likely to believe that technology will just fix it, which is not a high percentage, but they're still higher than everybody else, and that we can just solve this. And I think that really is an interesting perspective. Like when we say it looks like the church doesn't care about this issue, like the statistics bear it out.
Yeah.
And this issue could be everything from environmental concern, care of the planet, climate change.
Like
whether
it can't be denied.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there is actually, and others have repeated these, others have done the same kind of studies. In fact, we're going to look at one from the Public Religion Research Institute. They've done the same things. And they show over and over that actually the percentage of evangelicals that care about climate change has actually gone down from 2014 to 2023 when they did the last survey. It's actually gone down. It's as low as 6% in some places, even as more and more evidence is kind of piling up. So I think that leaves us with the question that we started this whole episode with is why? Why are we so afraid to talk about it? Why are we so afraid of the issue? You've offered at least some perspective. I mean, what is behind that? Because it seems that we have a mandate from God to care for this planet. It seems like one of the best ways to alleviate poverty in many places. And we're so afraid of this subject because I think it makes us look a certain way or we're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
What is that? What's behind it?
We're not teaching this to Christians.
Yes.
We're not talking about this in the church. We're not making people aware of how important it is in our holy scriptures to do this. So I don't think there's a strong sense of responsibility for caring for this planet that we should have, because it is in the Bible. So that's number one. Christians aren't even aware that this is something we should take seriously, that God calls for us to do. If we could all agree on that, we'd be in a better place. I didn't say fixed.
Yeah.
We'd be in a better place if we could at least be like, oh, the Bible says this is a no-brainer. Of course we have to steward. If we could get there, that's already. But we're also in a society where we like drawing lines in the sand. And we almost make it a religious thing, like when we talk about don't touch of, don't taste of, like the sins. It's almost like that's the same when we're crossing political divides. We can't touch of or taste or have anything to do with, where I think there was a time in the past where both sides could come together and like agree on certain things and work. And I think now more than ever, because of the state of our nation, I hope it changes. People are more about drawing those lines, and we don't want to cross from one to the other, and we want to make it clear and public, like where we stand, and we don't want to look like we're a sympathizer outside of our group.
I think it's we need to be educated on how much the scriptures, beg us to care for this planet, and also go out of the scriptures and look into the world and see the statistics of the planet and see what's out there. So not be of the world, go into it and see. Like, I feel like a lot of people in the church pews don't know where we're headed, and they're blind to the statistics. I did say that Gen Z is not blind to the statistics. We are a digitally connected generation, and we're seeing it all the time. But in our pews, we're not getting from the pulpit like, hey, this is the state of the planet right now. If there's this scripture, and then this is what's going on over on with all of our leftover fast fashion happening. Look at that in that country and whatnot.
It's staggering too.
Let me kick something out. Okay. I don't think we're ever going to convince a lot of people.
That God has called us to.
In my generation. I mean, I'm 67. There's bound to be some viewers who are betting I'm going to collapse during the course of this podcast, Bottom line is, I don't think we need to convince those who don't want to be convinced. It's really hard to convince them. Where I get hope is in your generations. You've got a solution there. And believe it or not, there's a decent percentage of my generation, our generation, that don't need to be convinced that God cares about the planet. But I think one of the ideas behind the employee to plant model, Monique, that you processed is it's not my genius, it was God's genius, care for the poor. Because the largest nonprofits in the world outside of hospitals and universities are child care organizations. World Vision and Compassion International bring in billions of dollars every year to care for these impoverished kids. So where I found an audience is we're going to give a job to these impoverished family members and they're going to educate their children. They're going to educate their children.
Right.
Okay? Nobody has to come in and provide the money to educate their children. They now have enough money to educate their children, to clothe their children, to feed their children. And guess what else? Their job is producing, planting, protecting, and that builds a habitat, forest habitat. The number one reason why we're in the biodiversity crisis and all the animals are disappearing is because of loss of habitat. I'm one of those guys that loves critters. I actually discovered a chameleon species that's named after me, and that's how weird I am.
You are so cool.
I
Which
know I'm
one?
so weird.
Tell us the species.
Cameleo triceras harani fitchi.
We'll link to that.
Yeah.
So you can
Can it
find
pop up? Right
I'll
here
send
on
you a
the-
picture of my fourth
That
child.
wasn't on my bingo card today.
That's amazing.
But I love animals. And when I went back to the Philippines, growing up in the Philippines, I had a pet monkey, I had a pet parrot. They're almost all they're gone largely in the overwhelming percentage of your original homeland. And you look across the world, it's like the Philippines, 97% deforested. Ethiopia, 95% deforested. Madagascar, 90% deforested.
Yeah.
So instead of guilt tripping people and demanding that they believe what they're not inclined to believe, do you want to care for the poor?
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And with that, they'll educate their children, they'll feed their children, etc.
Right.
And guess what else? You get freebie biodiversity out of it, and you get the aquifers being recharged, and clean waters are now beginning to flow through the streams and the rivers, and all of those verses out of Isaiah, etc., that talked about the springs being restored. It wasn't figurative; it was literal. If you restore a forest, they all come back. And here's one last thing: did you have high school biology? High school
Of course.
biology. Did you remember that part where they taught us that?
I don't remember much of high school biology. I'm going to be real
but
honest.
you still know this. It doesn't matter if you value carbon sequestration or not. It's a basic biological fact that if you plant a tree, it absorbs.
And the kelp in the new ocean
Yes.
forestation,
It
pulls the carbon out of the air.
It doesn't matter if climate mitigation through planting trees or restoring kelp forest is important to you. You get it anyway because it's part of God's design. So what I'm saying is, with this methodology, you get this broad spectrum of benefits. And you don't have to say, okay, I like this one, I like this one. Great, but you still get all of these.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm. That's what
how
I
you
just
convince those who
desperate.
don't care.
Well-
We just tell them it's about
And what
alleviating
you guys,
poverty.
there's enough of you.
Yeah.
You could do it.
Here's my concern of we don't have to convince your generation. This is the only reason why I think to some extent we do. Because I think people are leaving churches. Because for this reason, which is not anyway, that's another thing.
I think we need to convince
I
your
think-
generation.
But so we have a generation that cares about it.
Right.
And we're fighting upwards to make changes, and we're excited, and we want our church to get on board. And then the top down is saying no, 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 no. And people are leaving the church over it.
So start churches.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or they're so frustrated
Start
they check out
churches.
of their faith. But that's the only... Like, I do think our generation does care about it. So all I can hope is that generation, as some of them rise up and take the places in the next generation of those jobs and become the new pastors or ever, make those changes. And you hope that it's not like a top-down thing where they're teaching the next generation not to care, and that cyclical thing continues. So that's...
I can't ask you your age because that's rude. I was 25.
Almost 43.
I was 25 when I planted a church.
Right.
And it doesn't, you don't have to grow that church,
but
that big church.
Not everyone's gonna be planting churches, right?
Well,
we have
but-
more attendees than we have
Well,
church
you just said the
planters.
secret word. Jesus didn't say go into all the world and make attendees. He said go into all the world and make disciples. And you're making disciples right now through this podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, you teach.
Yeah.
You teach.
I think the place where the generations make a difference is we've got a generation that's leaving over the issue and frustrated by it, thinks
Right.
the church doesn't care.
Right.
We've got your generation, which was angsty about everything and knew a lot and was really worried about these things.
Right.
Now it's their turn. But the older generations are the ones making the policy on this. This is the problem. Like
That is
more
the problem.
Yeah, more and more older people are in politics across
Out of
the board.
touch with like
Right.
what is desired
Yeah.
from.
Not just out. I mean, they're just someday history is going to judge all of those people who stood in the way of these issues.
That's
what
I'm glad you
Romans-
said that. 'Cause
That's
like
what
just-
Revelation 11:18 says.
Someday
yeah,
it will history will judge all of those people who denied this for, because maybe the oil lobby was behind them, business was behind it. But I also want to be clear, our podcast is about peeling apart the influence of the American culture from the Christian faith. Like
Right.
our reason for doing this is because it's our first vocation. It's what God desires.
Right.
It's God's will.
And maybe
it's
that's
our vocation.
getting covered by industry, wealth, and economics,
or
and like,
even liberal and progressive agendas. Like
on both
so like if you're going to
sides.
care for the planet because it's a liberal progressive issue, that's the wrong reason. If
Right.
you're going to care for the
Right.
planet because of some or not care about the planet because of some conservative agenda, and I think what I was trying to do this week is peel like where do we get this, because I'd like churches to teach this, but pastors are afraid to teach
Yes.
this. Because if you start teaching on this, people are going to empty out. There's certain things that in our country now, if you teach on or mention, you're
No
just
matter
branded-
how biblically it sounds.
Doesn't matter.
Sure, but then to go back to his thing, the people that will empty out are the ones that don't spend your energy convincing them. They'll empty out, but I just want to
They're also the donor class, though. That's the
True,
thing. Most
but-
pastors
but-
will literally lose their churches
True,
over
but
these issues.
call me Paul because I have a letter to the church right now. I think that
Call me Paul.
because I think there's an opportunity for you to grow in this way. I think that Gen Z and their heart and their drive can be so powerful to bring about goodness into the world,
Yes.
into the kingdom of
Yes.
God
Yeah.
in a way that the church does not know the power that they have yet because
Right.
they undermine them for their age. Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young. And here's my
That's in the
thing
Bible,
too.
by the way.
Yeah, bars, right? I'm quoting it. I think that churches, you guys have an opportunity to let in this beautiful generation in this way. If it'll cost you donors, it'll cost you longtime members that don't give a hoot about the planet anyways, but it'll bring about this generation in, and if you give them space and opportunity. I was looking at a report preparing for this podcast, and it was from the Future Retail report, and they did research on how 87% of Gen Z will buy into any product as so long that it is sustainable and doing something for the planet.
Yes.
So you have Patagonia that is saying we are taking full responsibility for the entire life cycle
Yeah.
of our products. You have IKEA doing all that they can to ensure that their products are sustainably made, and how are they going to leave an impact on this. Gen Z is looking for places like that. They're buying into those products. 87% of them want to buy into that. So if the church can pivot and make room for that and make initiatives like that, you will welcome in this generation that will bring
Then
about
they'll
this
grow up
change.
and they'll be the donors giving to the church that cares about
Yeah, no,
sustainability.
it is a beautiful opportunity you have
Yeah.
to let
That
this
takes guts,
generation
though.
in. It
That
does
takes
take
guts.
guts. It's going to cost you, but
Yeah,
that's
that
been
takes guts.
discipleship. That's
Right.
been following
Right.
Jesus. That's been following
Right.
scripture.
Yes.
And
Amen.
I also dare to say, like, there's this sort of agreed upon sense, like if you are a Christian, that we will answer for things one day, right? Where God is like, what did you do with your time? And like, how did you steward what I gave you? And we will, like, if you're a Christian and you believe that, we will answer. You better believe that, like, part of that is how we stewarded this planet.
Yeah.
Like, I really think we're going to make an account for those
Truth.
things. And that is heavy. I know that's like a heavy thing to just drop in the middle of this, because I'm not trying to like guilt and scare you or whatever, but just to lay the importance of like what this is, you will have to make an account for that.
Yeah. I think
And
that's
let that sit with
we,
you.
We tell people that everything has to be stewarded. Your time, your treasure, your talents, your experiences, everything, right?
Yeah.
We never think about the fact that God has given us this planet to also steward.
Yeah.
And it's an express commandment. And,
Yeah.
and we just think, oh, but he'll forget all about it.
Right.
Because he's gonna remake it. Right. But
No,
he won't
this is
ask
a
us
kingdom
what we
issue.
did. Right.
Yeah.
Right. He won't, because we'll be responsible for all the people that were led into poverty or whatever those things are because of what we did.
Because they're
the
so
generations
interconnected. Yeah.
The illness illnesses that all the things that come in. And I think that's, I would piggyback off of what you said, Wisdom, too, about if Gen Z is looking at those organizations and saying 87% of them would send their dollars like to those organizations, or they would give their
They would literally
purchases,
spend more for
right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is where I'd say pastors take courage for a moment, right? Like, this is a biblical issue, and it is pretty clear in Scripture. And if our fear, and that really is what it is our fear that causes us not to talk about this issue. But we, as pastors, we want people to follow Jesus. We want people to come into our churches and learn about him.
Right, accurately.
And we want to first teach accurately, first teach truthfully, and all of that. But also recognize that there's a whole generations of people that we're wondering, why are they not following? Why are they not coming to church? Why are they doing these things? It's
Watch
because,
their ears perk up when this topic comes up.
Yeah, because I want to say that 87% of Gen Z would go to a church that talked about this.
100%.
And that was behind
give
this,
to
right?
that.
Yeah, they're
And
not
you
just going
would
to shop at
actually-
Patagonia. They're actually going to come and
Right.
listen to your teaching and be shaped and transformed
And all
and
of a sudden, the
discipled.
church feels relevant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And if the marketing world is already on this, come on, church, like, let's catch up and like take advantage of this for the sake of the kingdom, for under the name
As
of God,
opposed to
through the local
profit
church,
or-
through the local church that is God's plan A.
Yeah.
For like after Christ, he's like, through the body. Be the lens that, takes in this beautiful generation and looks at through the world. And don't let all of the rest of the organizations, Patagonia, IKEA, whoever, benefit from this, because they're benefiting it monetarily, right? But we have a different motivation.
They have a monetary motivation.
Exactly.
Of course.
But here's, I guess I'm old enough to say, actually, it's not a new issue that the church is irrelevant to a generation.
No.
I mean,
It's identifying the
I-
ways in which it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you know about the Jesus movement?
Yeah.
The Jesus movement occurred because the World War II generation became legalistic and didn't care about civil rights in global wars like Vietnam.
Yeah.
And the Jesus movement was huge. And you say the church. What is the church? There's 4 of us here. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst. So we're a church right now. And all I'm saying is we need to be careful not to believe in any way, shape, or form that we're victims and that we have no recourse. Your generation is caring about the right things when it comes to the planet, the poor, and a number of other key issues that my generation largely has ignored. Now, I will say this. You ready for this? You don't have to convince cross-cultural servants, or what's called missionaries historically, that climate change isn't real. They know it's real. When I went back to the Philippines for the first time after 30-something years, I left at 15. That shows you how old I am. And I went back in when I was 40. I was shocked because all the forests that I grew up playing in were gone. The coral reefs were destroyed, and they had 7 months of drought with no measurable rainfall on Mindanao in the area that I grew up in. And that is impossible when I was a kid. If you'd have told me that when I was a boy, I'd say you're smoking something. And bottom line is, it rarely went a week, even during dry season, 2 weeks in dry season when it didn't rain. So missionaries and their cross-cultural partners, all the Filipinos, all the Ethiopians, all the Malagasy, they know that this is real. So partner with the right people.
Yeah.
And you're the right people. You're the right people. And it doesn't have to be through IKEA. Like the organization that I led previous to Accelerated Restoration Collaborative, we had 1,400 business partners. And they all wanted something out of it, more sales. What if it was just pure motivation?
Yeah.
What if you just, and I'd like to land my thoughts this way. Give what you can and talk to your friends and your family. Don't worry about who's not doing what right or thinking right. Lead. And here's the text that NT Wright's a big hero to me.
Same.
Good. You know the refrigerator magnet verses like Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for good for those who love Him and who've been called according to His purpose. he works for the good of those who love him. It's very passive. He's sovereign. It's all going to work out. Your life is screwed up. The world's screwed up. The planet's screwed up. But he's going to fix it, everything in the end. But N.T. Wright teaches this. It's mistranslated. And the RSV is the only version that gets it right. We know that in everything God works for good with those who love him. Mm-hmm. Not for those who love him, with those who love him. And after suffering through 2 years of Greek and
so from prosperity gospel to a responsibility.
Well, it takes it back.
Participatory.
Right.
It takes it back to we're active agents. This is our original vocation. Come on, let's get busy and address the desperate needs of the world.
It's not political. It's literally a God thing.
Let's join with him because he wants to restore the planet.
Yeah.
It is. So I think this is the way that the Christian movement should be. If you're listening to this and you're wondering, the question caught your attention, why don't Christians talk about this? We've offered some of those answers, but the ending of this is that we do need to talk about this.
Yes.
And I'd go a step further. We need to actually do something, because even among those of us who care, a lot of us care but don't do anything. So we're going to link some ways that you can do something. I think that for those who are still wondering, like, is this really an issue? John Piper, who is not a liberal by any stretch, who's on the conservative end of evangelicalism, actually has this to say. He compares caring for the planet with caring for the body, our own like physical bodies. He says the body is going to die and it's going to be raised. And the earth is also going to be recreated. And he's citing Romans 8 as well. Both are going to go through that. But he says neither the eventual dissolution of the body or the eventual dissolution of the earth makes them worthless now. Imagine if someone said to you, well, your body's going to die someday. So just go ahead and do whatever you want, like hack off a limb. I mean, just who cares? You're going to get a new one later. None of us would do that. So if you're on the end of the spectrum where you think, well, we're going to get a new planet later, that doesn't mean we don't care for the one that we have now, especially when lives depend on it and people are going to literally lose their lives over this. And it may be your generation, it may be a generation that comes afterwards, but that is not a reason, right? On the other side of it, those of us who care, we're actually challenged to go beyond just the words, to do something about it, right? And to do something.
Orthopraxy time.
Yep. And one of the best ways you can get involved in funding some of these organizations that are doing this, not only sustainably, but they're creating these jobs and they're having this incredible success. And I think if you heard nothing else in this episode, I'm just so glad you're here, Steve, because I think it gives me like pride to know that the person who gets to say, like, I led organizations as a CEO of several organizations that planted not 25 million that could have been planted, but 1 billion trees.
Actual.
Right. Is a follower of Jesus who has done this as a ministry, as along with all the other ministries.
Let's
your
lead the
entire
way
life.
in these things.
And he has a chameleon named after him.
Yes. Impressive if for no other reason. That should be the thing. That should be the thing that we all remember.
Let's make it not taboo, right? To talk about. Let's just strip it of that.
Yeah, let's actually follow Jesus and not some conservative culture, not a liberal culture, not an American culture.
Not the American culture,
Let's
transform
follow
culture.
Jesus, yes.
Yeah.
Let's do that in the way that it was originally intended. So when we stand before the Lord, we go, this is what I did with the time you gave me, the talents you gave me, and even the planet you gave me.
Yeah.
We hope you'll join us on that journey and get active with us. This is Jesus versus America. Tell us what you think.
Follow us on all social media platforms at Jesus versus America. And find more resources on our official website, jesusversusamerica.com.